Harper Audio presents The Heretic's Treasure by Scott Mariani, read by Colin Mace. Chapter 1. The Western Desert, Egypt, late September 2008. Nobody knew how many centuries the desolate Bedouin fort had been standing out here among the oceans of sand, its crumbling walls abandoned long ago. Perched up high on a ruined tower, a vulture cocked its head and peered down at the line of dusty 4x4 vehicles that passed through the gateway and pulled up in the courtyard. The passenger door of the lead vehicle swung open. A combat boot crunched down into the sand, and a man stepped out of the car, stretching his cramped muscles after the long trek westward and shielding his eyes from the sun's white glare. There was no wind. The air was a furnace. The man's name was Khaled Kamal, and he was one of Egypt's most wanted terrorists. The man without a face, the one they could never catch. The rest of the group climbed down from the vehicles. 11 men, all watching their leader. Nobody spoke. They wore a mixture of military combat fatigues, T-shirts and jeans. 6 of them had stubby AK-74 assault weapons slung over their shoulders. There were a lot more guns in the vehicles, the smell of cordite still on them. Kamal scanned the empty ruin. He scratched the 3-day-old stubble on his chin and thought about the events of the last 36 hours. The diversion had worked well. If the choppers had been mobilized after the attack, then the anti-terrorist forces were hunting in the wrong place. Nobody would be looking for them out here, in the middle of nowhere, hundreds of miles west across the desert from the Aswan to Cairo railroad, where Kamal and his gunmen had opened fire on a northbound tourist train. He smiled to himself as he replayed the fresh images in his mind. The passengers had been sitting ducks, 6 carriages ripped to shreds by automatic fire, blood on the tracks and on the sand, another successful job. But after more than a decade, Kamal was getting bored with taking potshots at Westerners. Back in 1997, when the radical Gamma al-Islamiyah group had massacred more than 60 tourists at Hatshepsut's temple near Luxor, Kamal had been the only one who got away from the anti-terrorist commandos. Since then, he'd been involved in dozens of bus ambushes, tourist resort bombings, gun attacks on Nile River cruisers, assassinations of U.S. business travelers. Kamal had personally packed the nails into the motorcycle suicide bomb that had caused carnage at the Khan al-Khalili Bazaar in 2005. All small stuff. He had his sights on something bigger, much bigger. He had the talent, the will, and the manpower, and most importantly, he had links to networks all across North Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. All he lacked was funding. And for the kind of plan that had been forming in his mind, he knew he'd need a lot of it. A hell of a lot. But all that was for the future. Now the dozen men needed to escape the murderous desert heat for a while. It would be cool later, but the sun was hot enough to cook a man in his boots. The ruined fort offered shade, as well as something more valuable. Kamal unscrewed the top of his canteen and poured the last drops of water into his parched throat. He tossed the empty container into his black Nissan Patrol and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. Hani, the youngest of the crew, was gesticulating and grinning. "See, didn't I tell you?" he laughed, pointing at the round stone well in the middle of the courtyard. Kamal shot him a look. He hadn't stayed alive this long by trusting people, and he was about to find out whether he could trust this one. They leaned over the edge of the well and peered down. The shaft was deep, disappearing into darkness. Kamal picked up a loose piece of stone and dropped it in the hole. He listened for the splash. Nothing. "You said there would be water here," he said. He slapped away a sandfly. Hani said nothing, just made a face and shrugged. Yusef joined them at the edge. His bald scalp was glistening with sweat. He wiped it and replaced the tattered green baseball cap that he always wore. "We should have headed for the Farafra oasis instead." Kamal shook his head. The oasis area was only 30 miles to the south, and its inhabitants were mostly Bedouin. It should have been a safe haven for them, but you never knew when a police informant...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?